I was proposed to by Daniel, and my mother and I were invited to Daniel's parents' house. Upon arriving, my in-laws, without much of a greeting, asked about my mother's background. When my mother explained that she had dropped out of college to give birth to me and raised me on her own, my mother-in-law poured tea over her head. "A high school graduate as your mother? We should call off the engagement." After we were shown to the room and I realized I had forgotten my handkerchief in there, my mother and I went back to retrieve it. As we were about to pen the door, I heard Daniel's voice. "Nancy is better than Camila, don't you think? Both Nancy and her parents are college graduates. Daniel's true love? She's much better than the current woman. So, can we get engaged?" Well, I guess so. Everything went dark in front of me. My mother forcefully pushed open the door and entered the room, picking up the handkerchief. She glared at my in-laws. "Well, I'll just have to ruin your company then." As we walked towards the train station, my sadness quickly turned into a boiling rage. "Just wait and see, I'll make you regret dumping me. I am Camila, a 40-year-old housewife. Since graduating from college, I had been working without looking back, and before I knew it, I was in my late 30s. I had never been interested in romantic relationships since my student days, and even though my friends were getting married one after another, I didn't feel any particular pressure. However, last year, when one of my friends came to visit with her child, my mother, who held the baby and patted its chubby arms and cheeks, had a lonely look on her face. That was when I realized for the first time. My kind mother had never pushed me to get married, but deep down, she had wanted to hold her grandchild as soon as possible. After a while, Daniel joined our company. He seemed to be the heir to a well-known local company. Our company president knew Daniel's father, and Daniel was working at our company for a while to gain some experience. Daniel was tall and had a gentle demeanor, giving off the impression of a pampered young man. Naturally, the female employees were excited. I wasn't particularly interested in Daniel at first, but as we worked together on a project in the same group, we became close and had lunch together a few times. About 6 months later, during a meal, I noticed that Daniel was eating very little and seemed to be struggling to speak to me. "Camila, do you have a boyfriend?" "No. I guess I missed my chance because I was so focused on work." I laughed it off, and Daniel became flustered. "It's just that we never crossed paths before. You're beautiful and capable, after all." I was taken aback, and Daniel blushed up to his neck, stammering. "What about me?" "What?" "For the past 6 months, I've been watching you all this time. If you're okay with it, would you go out with me?" I was surprised because I hadn't considered him a romantic interest before. But I was touched by his lack of experience with women, and that's how I started dating Daniel. However, as our relationship progressed, I began to notice several unsettling things. Daniel, who appeared gentle and easygoing, was actually quite indecisive in his daily life and heavily dependent on his mother. When deciding on a menu at a restaurant, he would spend about 10 minutes pondering and then, unable to make a decision, would call his mother for guidance, which was quite surprising. "Mom, did you see the pictures I sent? Which is better, arrabbiata or carbonara? Should I go with seafood or meat for the main dish? I can't decide. What would you do, Mom?" And in the end, he would follow his mother's decision. But it didn't stop there. As our relationship deepened, Daniel started reporting on our relationship to his mother in great detail. Not only did he send photos of our meals, but also shared our date plans and even our return times. "Daniel is really close to his mom, huh?" I said with a hint of sarcasm, and Daniel smiled proudly. "In our family, we have a rule to eat dinner together. When I have dinner outside with you, Mom prepares some snacks and waits for us with drinks. That's why I let her know the return time every time." I thought it was unnecessary to inform his mother of our destination, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Until he confessed to me, I honestly hadn't thought of him as a potential partner. But after we started dating, I found myself increasingly drawn to him. He would make funny faces to calm crying children in stores and patiently explain the self-checkout process to elderly people who were confused. His kindness warmed my heart as well. He was a gentleman, kind, and good with kids. Hardworking and well-liked by his colleagues. He was perfect as a future husband. "By the way, Camila, what time do you need to be home?" "Home time?" I nearly dropped my fork in response to his question during dinner. "I live alone, so I don't have that kind of thing." Once I became a working adult, that rule was abolished. Oh, really? We have a 9 p.m. curfew. Huh, you have a curfew? I was taken aback, and Daniel nodded with a smile. Yeah, that's right. So when it becomes overtime, I can't go on dates. Let's work hard to finish our work, okay? Yeah. I forced a smile and replied. However, Daniel occasionally made comments that seemed like he was showing off, though I knew he didn't mean any harm. Daniel, the heir to the company, seemed to have been cherished by his parents from a young age. He attended a prestigious private school from kindergarten to high school, followed by an Ivy League university. His upbringing was reminiscent of famous celebrities. He had extracurricular activities like piano and violin lessons and even had a private tutor from a young age. No wonder he was so different in demeanor and speech from the boys I went to elementary school with. On the other hand, whenever I talked about my childhood, Daniel would narrow his eyes and wear a somewhat mocking expression. I doubt I'd get along with your classmates. They seem energetic, to say the least. His comments made me hesitate to reveal my own background. I had always told him that I came from a single-parent household, keeping the details a secret. The truth was, I didn't even know what my father looked like. During her university years, when my mother informed me that she was pregnant, her boyfriend at the time dropped out and disappeared. My mother, who also dropped out of college, worked tirelessly and received help from her family to raise me. I admired my strong-willed mother and took pride in my upbringing. However, the vast difference in our upbringing backgrounds with Daniel made me fear his reaction, so I had not been able to tell him. Even after we started dating, I kept our relationship a secret at work. Let's not tell our superiors until we're engaged. But people around us might figure it out quickly. I just don't like the idea of being teased by our colleagues. If someone points it out, we'll admit it. All right. Out of respect for Daniel's feelings, we continued to avoid being overly familiar. Naturally, this led to female coworkers flocking around Daniel, as he was the heir apparent and most of them tried to curry favor with him. I couldn't help but feel uneasy, but Daniel, being kind, didn't reject them outright. He greeted them with a smile. Among them, there was one female coworker who seemed to view me as her rival. She was Nancy from the same development team. Nancy, despite her incompetence, tried to flatter her male superiors and had a bad reputation among her female colleagues. Since Daniel joined the company, she had been making advances with her flirtatious glances and sweet voice, often resorting to physical contact. When I pointed out her repeated mistakes on similar tasks and asked her to be more careful, Nancy became visibly upset and kept making excuses. I'm not feeling well. I'll be in trouble if you don't support me more. I've explained it multiple times, and I told you to double-check, right? Yeah, I'll be more careful next time. Her attitude was unbearable, but when I complained to Daniel about it, he just looked troubled. She's young, you know. Let's just watch over her with warm eyes. She might be young. But she was already 30 years old and had been working for 7 years. I couldn't help but feel that she was taking advantage of Daniel's kindness. Especially when she started inviting him to lunch frequently. When I protested, Daniel reluctantly responded. She wants me to teach her about work. It's fine because you and I have dinner together, right? As expected, rumors began circulating that Nancy and Daniel are dating. However, when asked about it, Nancy played along with the gossip and didn't deny it. Oh, did you find out? Well, it's true. I just love older guys. I grew increasingly frustrated with Nancy for capitalizing on the situation, but Daniel seemed reluctant to confront her. Girls like her can be a hassle when you provoke them. The rumors will die down eventually if we just leave it be. His logic seemed sound, but Daniel continued to have lunch with Nancy as usual. However, when it came to work-related matters, I had no choice but to keep my mouth shut. Despite my inner turmoil, I had no choice but to trust Daniel. On the first anniversary of our relationship, during a more luxurious dinner than usual, Daniel gave me an engagement ring as a gift. My heart swelled with emotion at the formal proposal. I was so relieved and happy. Daniel had chosen me, not Nancy. Tears welled up in my eyes with joy and relief, and Daniel, blushing, said, "I'd like to introduce Camila to my parents soon." I agreed without hesitation to this long-awaited request. Once we got the approval of our future in-laws, we could proceed with the wedding and inform our workplace. That way, Nancy, as presumptuous as she was, would surely give up. Before meeting Daniel's parents, we first invited him to my family's house. I had already informed my mother that I was in a relationship and had been proposed to recently, so she welcomed Daniel warmly to our home. "I'm sorry for the old and small house." "Oh, not at all." My mother apologized as Daniel looked around the aging interior with interest. Likely aware of his background due to the information I had shared. "I've heard a lot about you from Camila. You seem like a very kind person." During this opportunity, my mother told Daniel about how she had become a single mother. When she revealed that my father had disappeared, and she had to drop out of college to raise me, Daniel showed a slightly surprised expression. As we chatted and enjoyed coffee, served by my mother, we had a pleasant time. When it was time for Daniel to leave, my mother saw us off. "She tends to be too straightforward at times, but deep down, she's a good kid. Please take care of Camila. Camila is reliable, and it's comfortable to be around her. I look forward to getting to know her better." With a polite demeanor, Daniel also responded. I drove Daniel to the station, and then I returned home for dinner. Soon, the day for the meeting with my future in-laws arrived. My mother and I both wore elegant dresses and nervously got into Daniel's car to go to his parents' house. We passed through an impressive gate, walked on a stone path, and headed to the entrance. We were led into a room with built-in shelves. A garden extended beyond the snow viewing screens. As I sat facing my future in-laws, I felt extremely uneasy throughout the meeting. This was because, since we entered the house, Daniel's parents had been glaring at my mother with piercing eyes. In an attempt to ease the tension, I drank the coffee my mother-in-law had prepared, but my father-in-law asked my mother with a stiff expression. "Is it true that your highest educational qualification is high school graduation?" "Yes, it is. I became pregnant with this child while I was in college, so I dropped out and raised her alone." "See, it's just as Daniel told us." "Yeah." With furrowed brows, my mother-in-law also questioned my mother. "So, her father ran away, right?" "Well, that's how it happened." My mother replied with a wry smile. I felt annoyed. What did my mother's past have to do with Daniel's marriage? Just as I was about to protest, my mother-in-law suddenly grabbed my mother's cup and splashed it all over her head. I had no idea what was happening, and my mother and I were dumbfounded as my mother-in-law sneered at us. "A high school graduate's mother? We can't allow this engagement. It would tarnish our family's reputation." Beside my mother-in-law, my father-in-law crossed his arms and nodded as if it were only natural. Looking at Daniel as if seeking his support, I overheard him say to my parents, "Well, if my mother says it's no good, then I can't do anything about it. Now, just leave." In response to my father-in-law's unmistakable tone, my mother and I left the room in astonishment. The door closed with a crisp sound behind us. And my mother and I walked down the hallway that led to the entrance, keeping our eyes on the floor. After a while, my mother muttered, "I'm sorry, Camila. It's because of me." "What are you talking about? It's not Mom's fault. I was the one who didn't see through him." "That's right. It's actually better that I found out what kind of person he was before getting married. Although it's frustrating to back down now. Anyway, I need to wipe my hair. It's a good thing the coffee wasn't too hot. Oh, I left my handkerchief in the room." It was a lace handkerchief my mother gave me as a birthday present. Going back to get it would be annoying, but there's no guarantee that Daniel will return it later. As the door closed behind us, I heard Daniel's voice. "See? Isn't Nancy better than Camila? Both her parents have university degrees, and besides, she's younger, so she's more likely to have children sooner. Not only the bride but also her parents should have appropriate backgrounds for our family." My mother-in-law reluctantly responded to my father-in-law's tone. "Her parents and she have university degrees, and she's much better than the current girl. Can we proceed with the engagement? I guess we have no choice. Let's set a date for the meeting of the two families. Congratulations, Daniel." "Mom, Dad, thank you." Then everything went dark. Wait, was Daniel two-timing me? Did the purpose of today's meeting involve using me to convince his mother to accept his marriage with Nancy? As I stood there in shock, my mother forcefully opened the door. I walked up to Daniel and his surprised parents and picked up a handkerchief. When I rose to my feet, my mother, with a fierce expression, glared at Daniel's parents and declared in a thunderous voice, Well, I'll just have to shut down your company. What? Let's go, Camila. My mother said, striding away. I followed her, leaving Daniel's parents' house. As we trudged towards the station, my sadness quickly turned into seething anger. Playing with people's hearts was unforgivable. I couldn't let this slide. They would regret dumping me. I returned home in a state of boiling anger, but as I cooled down and became somewhat calmer, anxiety crept into my heart. After all, Daniel and I worked in the same department. Tomorrow was bound to be awkward. How should I even face him? I spent a sleepless night, and when I went to the office the next day, to my surprise, Daniel greeted me with a casual hello. He was all smiles as usual, completely unapologetic, and I, with my sleep-deprived and puffy eyes, felt like a fool. So, I decided to put aside my personal feelings and interact with him as if nothing had happened. However, from that evening onward, Daniel started bombarding me with messages full of excuses. I didn't stop loving you. Meeting you was just bad timing after I met Nancy. I fell in love with someone else, but I couldn't bring myself to break up with you. It was hard to admit, and I felt awful after proposing impulsively. Finally confessing felt like a relief. Let's forget about this incident. If the company finds out, it might affect my career. Let's continue being good colleagues, just like before. I was exasperated with Daniel, who seemed to care only about himself, and I couldn't find the words to reply. He persisted with calls after work. Camila, you're listening to my voice messages, right? Why won't you pick it up? Camila, even if we've called off the engagement, it doesn't mean we can't be friends. It's lonely when you ignore me. Let's maintain a good working relationship as we did before. It's common courtesy, right? Fed up, I showed the messages to my mother and discussed how to handle the situation, including listening to his voicemails. After a week of ignoring him, when I finally answered his call, Daniel sounded relieved. Camila, you finally picked up. I'm so glad. I was worried you'd block me. Daniel, I want to visit your parents' house one more time. That's a bit. As Daniel hesitated, I made a suggestion. I want to return the engagement ring. And also, it might be reassuring for your parents if we write a letter stating that we won't disclose this matter to our colleagues, don't you think? Fine. I'll ask my mom. That evening, I received a message from Daniel. With the promise that this would be the last contact, he agreed to let us visit his parents' house. I told Daniel that my mother and I would like to come over the next weekend, and we prepared thoroughly. On the day of the visit, Nancy had arrived at Daniel's parents' house ahead of us. She looked shocked when she saw me at the entrance. Camila? Why? I didn't invite Nancy, Daniel hurriedly explained. I invited her. I thought it would be better if everyone involved were present. Nancy, you'd like to witness me returning the engagement ring to Daniel, wouldn't you? I definitely want to see it. Excuse me for intruding. With a boisterous entrance, Nancy walked inside, causing Daniel and his parents to put on displeased expressions. However, his father welcomed Nancy with a smile. Daniel and his mother probably realized they couldn't send Nancy away. I, my mother, and Nancy were guided to the same room as last time. My mother, with a stern expression, extended her hand and demanded, "Hand over the diamond ring. That was expensive." I removed the engagement ring from my finger and handed it over as my mother grabbed it from me and promptly locked it in a jewelry box. Now, write an agreement that you won't talk about this incident at work. We can't trust a high school graduate's daughter. She placed the contract, along with a pen, on the table. After my mother and I reviewed the contents to ensure there was nothing strange, I signed it with my full name. Since you were probably after our money, trying to deceive Daniel, it's too bad it didn't work out. Camila, was it really like that? I thought you might be poor because your clothes and bags are simple. A loveless marriage is no good. Nancy sneered, giving my mother and me a disdainful look. Now, go home, you're in the way. Let's offer Nancy some high-quality coffee and dessert. Just wait a moment. Sure. Thanks a lot. During the daytime, Daniel's tipsy father, having whiskey, was entertaining Nancy in his slightly intoxicated state. Daniel watched with a pleased expression. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle and gave Nancy a piece of advice. Nancy, are you really planning to marry Daniel? Seriously, Camila, do you still have feelings for Daniel? You're being persistent. I laughed off her skepticism. No way. I just wanted to make sure. They say divorce is even more challenging than marriage, you know? Camila, stop teasing her. Didn't we say it was just bad timing? Daniel said it so brazenly that it made me want to burst into laughter. I stared at him and spoke firmly. What? Bad timing? You got some nerve. Nancy, you better get to know his true colors well. Cut it out. Just leave already. As my mother pulled me away, the IC recorder I had been holding fell onto the floor. The impact of the fall triggered it, and Daniel's voice echoed throughout the room. Olivia, I love you. Marry me. My in-laws and Nancy froze in shock. Sure, Daniel. You're drinking too much. What if you end up wasted like yesterday? What will you do then? In that case, I'll sleep in Olivia's lap. She'll pat my head for me. That's fine. I'll give you a lap pillow and pat your head. So, can we have some Armand champagne? Sure thing. I want Dom Perignon too. Okay. Order whatever you like. Yay! Our future president is so generous. Dom Perignon and Armand, coming right up. Nancy's face twitched. I know about these things. Both of those are incredibly expensive drinks. At this rate, no matter how much money you have, it won't be enough. Just leave it. We have plenty of money. That's why, Daniel, you said your curfew was at 9 p.m., right? After our date, you wanted to go to a nightclub. And you pretended it was to report to your mom, but you were actually telling the girls what time you'd be arriving at the nightclub, right? I sighed and glanced at his mother, who had turned pale. Daniel, you still haven't cut ties with that woman? Because Olivia is cute. Daniel pouted. Olivia has a serious illness. On top of that, her parents are missing. Yet, she's working at a nightclub to send her brother to college. She's such a good person, don't you think? I glared at him and said sternly. She's someone I have to support, you know. That storyline is definitely a lie, isn't it? Stop it. Just go away. This isn't the time to make a fuss. My normally mild-mannered Daniel raised his voice, leaving my in-laws and Nancy wide-eyed in astonishment. After a brief pause, Nancy covered her face with both hands and burst into tears. This is awful. I've always believed in you, Daniel. Nancy. He's breaking up with Camila, so let's get married. He's been telling me that ever since we started dating. So, I endured only being able to meet on weekends. I never thought I'd be seen as lower than those girls. Sorry, Nancy. Daniel stammered. It's different. Olivia is like my idol. You know how some people continue supporting their favorite idols even after getting married? She's that kind of presence. So don't worry about it. You're saying you love me, but what about the money you've spent on her in just one night? Even if we get married, you'll still spend money on that woman. I can't forgive this. Daniel, don't make Nancy cry. Hey. I don't know if you hired a private investigator or something, but stop digging into this. They retorted with a malicious tone, and I couldn't help but smirk. Of course not. This was just to confirm. I heard that divorce is even more difficult than marriage. Ugh. My mother-in-law, who was at a loss for words, was the one I looked at next. For Nancy, Daniel is important. Huh? Or is it the money that's important? Hey! Don't compare me to her. Nancy shot back at me. Because, after that drinking party the other day, messages came from colleagues. Nancy was drunk and bad-mouthing Daniel. Ignoring Nancy's pale face, I showed the messages from colleagues to my in-laws and Daniel. Nancy was saying terrible things about Daniel. Calling him a weak-willed rich kid, accusing her of faking affection for money. Isn't that a bit much, especially considering that she learned a lot from him at work? Despite Nancy's dismayed expression, I continued. Well, this isn't any solid proof. It's just some coworker talking nonsense behind my back. Besides, maybe I was just jealous because Seiji and I are close. Nancy, with a slightly malicious tone, wiped her tears and looked up at Daniel. I'm sorry. I got jealous earlier. I love you, Daniel, and I was afraid I'd lose you to that nightclub girl. I understand, Nancy. You know you're the one I love the most. Nancy and Daniel hugged tightly, and Nancy's mother let out a sigh of relief. But just then, Daniel's father interrupted. "Even though I said I liked you." In a low mutter, Nancy's mother and Daniel turned to look at him. He slammed a glass of whiskey on the table with a determined expression. He was completely drunk and had a steady look in his eyes. "Oh, you had a bit too much to drink. Why don't you go rest in the back?" Nancy tried to push Daniel's father towards the back room, but he brushed her hand aside and shouted, "Nancy loves me. She's marrying me because she wants to be with me. Right, Nancy?" Nancy let out a small scream. His father, overcome by alcohol, struggled to operate his phone but managed to show us a message exchange on the screen. It was filled with heart and kiss emojis, a very intimate conversation. "Daniel's father, you have such a handsome head of white hair." "Thank you. Nancy, you're cute too. I asked Daniel if we could live together as soon as we get married. Then I can see you every day. I'll ask my wife to consider it too. I'm looking forward to it." Daniel doesn't like whiskey, so it's boring. We have similar tastes in alcohol, so I'm really happy. Yeah. We can have snacks made by my wife and watch sports together. By the way, don't you drink with Daniel's mother? It's not fun to drink with that old lady. It's 10 times better to drink with the adorable Nancy. Oh, come on. Throughout this exchange, Nancy's mother turned pale first, then her face flushed bright red. It was as expected. I had predicted that if Nancy showed her affection for Daniel, her drunken father might let something slip. She thought that if Nancy showed her affection for Daniel, his tipsy father might spill the beans. "Did you know about this?" Surprisingly, Nancy asked me, her eyes filled with surprise. "A while ago, when we went to the bar, I saw you drinking intimately with a middle-aged man. You're flirting with him at work, but what's going on?" I was curious. But when I realized the man was your father, it all made sense. "Dad, what does this mean?" Even though his wife and Daniel stared at him with disbelief, he showed no remorse and just shrugged it off. "It's not cheating. Nancy and I have pure love. Don't mess around. What do you think of me?" Daniel's yelling mother glared at me and my mother with burning anger. "We've been getting along just fine, and now it's all messed up because of you too. How are you going to take responsibility for this?" "Even if you say that. We haven't done anything wrong." My mother responded calmly as if she were troubled. Next, my angry mother scolded the still shocked Daniel. "It's all because Daniel fell for a weird woman in the first place that things turned out like this. Hey, you, can you get this woman fired by the company president? You know him, right?" "Well, I wonder if I can do that." "Hey, my senior was a bother too. Can't you do it?" "All right. I'll ask my acquaintance, the company president, for help." Daniel's father immediately agreed to Nancy's pleading, and his wife sent a lingering gaze at him. My mother and I exchanged glances and shrugged. Firing her. Would it be difficult, I wonder? My parents-in-law, Daniel, and Nancy peered at the business card I took out of my bag. Immediately, everyone seemed to lose their composure. "Is this the vice president of one of the leading companies? Camila's mom? You've got to be kidding." Furthermore, they opened their mouths in astonishment when they saw a picture of me on my phone. And for a good reason. In the photo, I was standing next to the CEO of a well-known large corporation, both of us wearing friendly smiles, looking close. "You're just an ordinary employee at our company, right? Why are you so close to that CEO?" "I'm in the same situation as Daniel. I joined our company for social experience," I explained in a matter-of-fact tone. "That company was founded by my ancestors. When my mother's sister, my aunt, retired from her position as CEO, my mother took over as CEO, and I became the vice president. You know, people often say that family-run businesses tend to be lenient with their relatives. That's why I made sure to get experience outside the company." "What? You plan to become a CEO with just a high school diploma? Are you kidding?" My mother responded calmly to my scolding mother. "You know, even with a high school diploma, you can learn the know-how of running a business. After studying from books, I attended seminars and got certifications." With a faint smile, my mother calmly explained. "You should quit looking down on people just because they only have a high school education. You'll end up embarrassing yourself." My mother's smirk left her mother without words, and she turned red with embarrassment. In exchange, Daniel asked a question. But the house where we met was old and small. Our main residence is currently under renovation. You know that mansion in front of the station? We're using it as a temporary residence. What? So, Camila didn't approach Daniel with financial intentions. I was raised with a commoner's perspective, which is why I was sent to a public school. Isn't that right, Mom? That's right. We didn't want you to become someone who flaunted their wealth just because we were well off. His parents and Daniel seemed to have no energy to argue back. If you ever do anything strange to my daughter in the future, I will not hesitate to crush your company. Keep that in mind. Finally, my mother said this to Nancy's parents before leaving their house with me. As soon as they found out about my family's wealth, Nancy's parents and Daniel seemed to regret breaking off the engagement. I broke up with Nancy. I realized you're the most important person to me. Let's start over. Nancy's mom is just a high school graduate, but she's a vice president, right? So, my mom says it's okay for Camila to marry Nancy. I agree with her. He sent me such ridiculous messages, so I immediately blocked him. Luckily, there was a vacancy in the administrative position in the sales department, so I applied for a transfer and was moved there. Daniel's family was in turmoil because of the near affair between Nancy and his father, which led to his mother slapping divorce papers on his father. Nancy came over later and declared in front of his mother that she would marry his father, which infuriated his mother. However, his father insisted that they were just drinking buddies, so his mother hired a detective to gather evidence of the affair between Nancy and his father. Prompted by my mother's words, Daniel's mother embezzled company funds, saying, "Let's make her mine before we go bankrupt." However, her suspicious behavior caught the attention of the company's executives, and the embezzlement was discovered promptly. Additionally, it was revealed that Daniel had used company funds multiple times. After a heated argument between Daniel's mother and other relatives, the company owned by Daniel's parents eventually went bankrupt. Well, that's quite a mess, isn't it? It's not our problem, though. My mother casually commented as she read the local newspaper. Afterwards, Daniel's mother and Daniel settled with the relatives by paying compensation. Daniel, with rumors of embezzlement circulating at work, became uncomfortable and eventually resigned. Now, he doesn't even go to nightclubs and spends his days cooped up at home. I became friends with my colleagues in the sales department and started a new chapter in my life. It seems that I'm more suited for focusing on my career than romance. I wanted to reassure my mother, but I've decided to stop pushing myself. Someday, if fate allows, I'll take my time to get to know someone's character thoroughly rather than being swayed by their appearance or demeanor before starting a relationship.